dinner and conference. My name is Barry Latucci. I'm Executive Director of Jasenovac's Research Institute. I welcome you. This year's conference, we have a very interesting, distinguished panel of experts. Stefan Kaganovic, Mina Zirojevic, and Liliana Petrovic, and also Daniel Simic, who was added just last week. Our theme this year is on false narratives and ideology, how ideology is used to miseducate, confuse, and destroy people by pitting them against each other, making them hate each other, and also to demonize certain groups in order so that certain power elites can take advantage of the situation and impose their false narrative, their false ideas on the population. Just a few words about Jasenovac's Research Institute. We started Jasenovac's Research Institute at the end of the first international conference on Jasenovac in 1997, which was held at Kingsborough Community College. It was a conference that brought together about 20 survivors as well as about 20 historians to talk about the Holocaust in Yugoslavia for the first time. And what we did and what we continue to do in Jasenovac's Research Institute is to make sure that the genocide against Serbs and Romas is included in the history of the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a historical event, and from a scientific point of view, it doesn't belong to anybody. It is an objective fact that 6 million Jews were killed, that also hundreds of thousands of Serbs were killed, hundreds of thousands of Romas were killed. We know who died, we know who was targeted as the nations, the peoples that were demonized and who fascism used as their targets for destruction. We know who they are, we know who the perpetrators were, we know it was German imperialism, assisted by Croatian and also Hungarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, and Albanian and Bosnian Muslim fascist groups as collaborators. These are historical facts. So the Holocaust is an event that today is taught and in fact is mandatory throughout the world, throughout much of the world. Maybe not the whole world, but it is a mandatory subject in many curriculums around the world, including in North America and Europe. Therefore, it is absolutely essential that our story be told properly by those who care about it. Because for us, the Holocaust and what happened in Yugoslavia during World War II is not just some page in a history book. It is, in fact, an absolute necessity. It is a biological necessity for us to fight for the truth so that we are able to, we must do it because we know that if we don't do it, these crimes will be perpetrated against us again in the future. So this is for us an absolute must that we must do. We don't have a choice. We must fight for the truth and establish the truth about the Holocaust. However, there are those who wish to perpetrate lies, who wish to exclude certain victim groups, who wish to distort the story. And this is particularly true in the case of Yugoslavia. When the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. was established in 1993, just to give you an example, the Clinton administration invited to the opening of that museum the president of Croatia, Franjo Tuđman. Franjo Tuđman was an open anti-Semite. He was an open anti-Serbian racist. He was a racist. He was a fascist. And yet, he was invited to the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, a man who is an apologist, or was an apologist, for Nazism and Ustashaism. And when they opened that museum, they deliberately excluded from the museum any discussion of Yugoslavia. They had a big map of Europe in the museum when they first opened it. I was there. They had a big map of Europe, and on the wall of this map of Europe, they had all the concentration camps and all of the places where the Nazis and their collaborators had been, except Yugoslavia was not included. It was just a white, blank space. This again is what I call a false narrative. You have deliberately excluded or deleted part of this important story. And now we must ask the question, why are false narratives created? They are created in order to advance the agenda of imperialist powers who use fascism and racism and demonization to obtain whatever objectives they have, whether they're economic or geopolitical. And so this is an example. Now, of course, at that time, there was the war in Yugoslavia was unfolding, and the civil war, although it was portrayed as a war of genocide by Serbs against Croats and Muslims and Albanians, but this was also a part of the false narrative. And the reason they had to lie about the Holocaust in the U.S. Holocaust Museum is because they had to portray the actual victims of the Holocaust, Serbs, Jews, and Romas, as not having been victimized at all, and Serbs as being the actual fascists. So the victims were, the truth was turned upside down. The victims were portrayed as perpetrators. This is a false narrative. And it was a false narrative created to advance the agenda of the United States and Germany especially, but also the United States and Britain, the European Union, which wanted the breakup of Yugoslavia so that they could then come in economically and geopolitically, militarily, to dominate this region for their own interests. Germany also has a long history of involvement in Yugoslavia, which people are not aware of. Germany has long been involved in the Balkans. There were over 500,000 German Yugoslavs up till 1941, or up till the end of World War II. It is true that they were expelled after the war because they were overwhelmingly pro-Nazi. It is true that many of them they lost their property. It is true that they suffered greatly, but they had been pro-fascist, pro-Nazi during the war, and they had collaborated and been perpetrators of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. Germany never forgave Yugoslavia for this, and German propaganda, if you read German, you know Germany published book after book, article after article about the communist Serbs, communist Yugoslavia, what it did to its German population, how they sued. Well, I feel sorry for the Germans, but I feel sorry for any victim. But they were not also perpetrators. And it did not justify Germany's demonization of the Serbs and Germany's breakup of Yugoslavia, military aid to Croats and Slovenes and Bosnian Muslims. Later, in 1995, we have a new false narrative that was created, and this is an issue that will be discussed today by Stefan Kaganovic and some of the other speakers, the issue of Srebrenica. Srebrenica is a town in Bosnia which had been under the control of the Bosnian Muslim 28th Division of the Bosnian Muslim Army. And in the years between beginning of the war in Bosnia in 1992 to 1995, the Bosnian Muslims had ethnically cleansed the Serbian population surrounding Srebrenica. There were, I forget, Stefan will explain this in greater detail, but I believe there were 100 villages or something like that that were ethnically cleansed of the Serbian population by the Bosnian Muslim Army. The story that was, well, we know what happened. There was, in July 11th, 1995, the Bosnian Muslim military leadership had evacuated. The leading general, Nasser Oric, and his staff had left. And the Bosnian Serb general Mladic came into Srebrenica and took it over. What happened next is, of course, the issue of great controversy, because according to Western sources, there is supposedly a genocide in Srebrenica. Genocide was committed by Serbian forces, according to the false narrative of the United States and Europe. But in fact, it wasn't a genocide. There was no genocide. First of all, it's a distortion of the term genocide to say that even if it is 5,000 soldiers who died or 5,000 men who died, you can't say that that is genocide. It was a battle that took place. But this is an issue that is of great importance because today, throughout the world, Germany, the United States, Britain, and the other leading powers in the world want to impose this false narrative, not only in the curriculum, but by law. So in Canada today, there is a law that is about to be passed where it will criminalize you if you dare to deny that genocide took place at Srebrenica in 1995. This is exactly the kind of use of false narrative that we must fight. We have no choice but to fight this because this is a lie. Well, anyway, I want to move the agenda and I just wanted to give you sort of a taste of, or a kind of preview of what we're going to talk about today, and we'll open the floor for discussion at various points as well. And but before I move any further, I want to also introduce. Some of you may not know Father Jokan Majstorovic. Father Jokan has been a longtime friend of this organization, and we, for many years, held our dinner and conference in St. Savo's Church Hall, and Father Jokan was our host, and we very much appreciate Father Jokan. It's good to see you again. Please come up and say a few words, please.
I used to be a host, now I'm a guest. It's much better. Well, I just wanted to welcome our guests from Europe, from Serbia, Republic of Srpska, from Canada, and elsewhere. And I, as well, would like to commend Bari, who is working very hard to not forget Jasenovac here in this part of the world, which is very important. You know, the monument that was today uncovered is a great success, and it is something that one small group of people working very diligently, very hard, succeeded. I'm so sorry I could not make it to be there, but first opportunity I will be happy to go and pray in front of that monument, which symbolizes thousands of victims, innocent people that were killed by crazy people. Anyway, I just wish to Bari and all his team success in future endeavors, and I welcome all of you here, and my prayers are and blessings that God keeps you well and gives you strength to continue to promote and proclaim what is right and what is good, especially for the people that suffered much, Jewish community, Serbian, Roma, and other ones. God bless you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Father John. Don't leave yet. And we made this special sort of award for Father Jokan here that we meant to give it to him last year, but we didn't have a chance. And it says, this is Jasenovac Research Institute Certificate of Deepest Appreciation for Father Jokan Majstorovic in recognition of many years of faithful assistance and support in helping to commemorate the martyrdom of the hundreds of thousands of Serbian, Jewish, and Gypsy victims of World War II at the Croatian death camp Jasenovac. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we really appreciate it. As one of the founders of Jasenovac Research Institute once said, John Rams, who is still alive, he's 99 years old, but unfortunately suffers from Alzheimer's now. He said, you know, we Jews and Serbs, we died together. We suffered the same fate at the hands of the Nazis and the Ustasha. I'm just saying what he said. I'm not inventing anything new here. But he was a great speaker, if you remember John Rams. And he said, we died together in the camps at the hands of the fascists. We suffered the same fate. We experienced the same martyrdom. And we're buried in the same graves. And so we must fight together. And I think what John said, and John was a very progressive-minded socialist, and he was a supporter of Israel, and also a great humanitarian who really was a mentor to me as well. And to many others who remember him very fondly. I mean, he's still with us, but he's somebody that inspired us very much. Well, I guess at this time, it's a good time to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Professor Mina Zirojevic, who is a professor of human rights and international law in Belgrade, and who will open our conference with a presentation which will be on the screen, more or less, Jasenovac Then and Now. And please welcome Dr. Mina Zirojevic.
Thank you very much for having me. We had a smile with our dear priest, and now this topic is really difficult for me, as I'm sure it's going to be for you. Well, let's start. Jasenovac Then and Now. We all know all the things about Jasenovac, like that it was the Auschwitz of this part of the world, Serbia and Bosnia and so on. But no event in European history is more misunderstood than the role of Croatia and Serbia in the Second and the New Balkan Wars. It was misreported then, and it is misremembered now, as the history has a tendency to repeat herself. We were just talking, and we will talk about Srebrenica. And the thing that I always ask myself, how can a genocide be just in one place, Srebrenica, and just few other villages? And nobody speaks about Ustasha examination camps. It was minimum 24. This is just one part of it. And especially that was the only place on earth that created a camp just for kids. Looks like this. Concentration camps for kids from April 41 to May 41, almost 75,000 children less than 14 years old were tortured and murdered. Minister of Justice Milovan Žanić on June 2nd, 1941 said, "New state, our land, is just for the Croats and for nobody else. There is no means or method that we will not use to make our land ours and to clean it from all others, especially Orthodox Serbs." Max Luburić said that the children tomb pits was breathing for days when they were killed. In Šargovac, near Banja Luka, priest Tomislav Filipović, called Sotona, and his friend slaughtered 43 kids, 43. The teacher, I think she was even a Croat, lost her mind And in villages near Banja Luka, Drakulić, Šargovac, Imotika, more than 500 kids were killed. And that's not on the list that I presented just before. Every fifth victim was kid less than 14 years. And we have to ask ourselves, what came before Jasenovac? Became the Za dom spremni and Srbe na vrbe. That's let's make all the Serbs hang on the trees. And this is the faces. Nowadays, Davor and Ivo Stier. Ivo Stier was a Ustasha. He self-killed thousands of kids, and he was in Jasenovac in Stara Gradiška, and his grandson, who was born and raised in Argentina, was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that he was still proud of his grandfather. He was not named just Davor and then make his last name by mothers or something. He was Davor Ivo Stier. That's something like if Adolf Hitler's got kids, that the kid called Magdalena Adolf Hitler. He was very proud of his grandfather. And he was a minister in Croatia now. On the other side, we have stories about Jasenovac. The truth about Jasenovac is really easy to find. Jasenovac was a concentration camp. It was even pictured from planes, and we have 762 pictures of Croats killing and throwing people in the rivers and to clean Jasenovac from all the others. But we have the pictures. We have the bodies of 10,000 or less or more people that were dead. And we have the people who were there having this concentration camp work. We have the letters from Italian soldiers telling that that was an awful thing to do and that they would not take a part of it. We have the Germans writing too. Now Croats are saying that that was a working camp. And if we take that that's the truth, that is a working, what they were producing, the 10,000s or 100,000 people was producing something. Do you know what was produced in Jasenovac?
So.
Yeah, but not in that amount that should if everybody was working. And if there was babies, kids, pregnant ladies, old people, what happened with them? And all kind of deaths. If somebody dies now in factories, everybody's asking why. And what about all those pits? The second, everybody is saying the number of people. I think that the exact number of people is not really important. Why? More than 80% of Romas were killed during the Second World War in Croatia. And they didn't have any passports or IDs or anything. They were just names for the families. And if you kill all the villages and all the towns and all the places where the gypsies was, there was nobody else to say, my family, my father, my uncle, named like this. So they were just disappearing because they were thrown in the river and disappearing in all kind of awful ways. And then the Serbs. Most of them were just peasants from the field, and they didn't have. The only people there that was having the ID name and the last name was the Jewish. And that's more or less the truth. So the number of people, for me, it's not really important. You really like your father and mother, and if somebody kills that one, that matters from any side. Then they said that Tesla is a Croat. And I was in just Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was asking if Tesla is a Croat, what happened to Smiljane? Smiljane is, we all know, the place where Nikola Tesla was born. That village doesn't exist anymore. Why? Everybody was killed during the Second World War and now, during the Balkan Wars. So no Tesla exists anymore that was living in Croatia. So that's really a strange thing when they have. And of course they were saying that Jasenovac was an open hospital for typhus people. How many typhus people were there around the Croatia? And I just found a new one that they were saved because they were in a working camp. So all those people was saved in Jasenovac. And I really, just as a human, as a person, I cannot understand how someone can just tell that and don't feel anything inside, that sorry for those kids, for the people, for everybody. In Croatia, 40% of people said that the Serbs were the guilty one because that happened to them. 40% of the people that were asked. It's really too much. One side, there is a new book about Max Luburić, Sluga Domovine, the servant of the homeland. It's a really big book, and it's of course about how he was nice father or neighbor or whatever, he was a nice guy for something, and he just served his country. And the thing that I feel really awful is that the invitation is for the church, the Catholic Church. If you are a priest, you love God and you love all the people. That should be done like that. Do you know the difference between the old Šahovnica and the new Šahovnica? The old Šahovnica was white, red, and the new one is red, white. So see, that's here in the States. That's Ustasha, fascist. Yeah, here in the States, yes. And after that, it was another time in States when Thompson came, and again, this Šahovnica was. It was just a few years ago. And Thompson was just here.
November 2007.
November
At the
2007.
Croatian church over on 41st Street,
Yeah.
near 44.
It's a singer, we have to say.
It's I don't know, is it a singer, but he sings fascist songs.
Right.
Yes. And President Kolinda is often have a picture next to this one, not to the other one. And if somebody in Germany take a picture in front of the fascist symbol, I would ask, is that could be even possible? Ante Đapić wants to move the bodies of Max Luburić and Ante Pavelić in Croatia. What do you think that will happen when their body comes to Croatia? It will be a saint almost or something. A lot of people will go there and just ask for it. That's the songs that Jasenovac and Stara Gradiška, that's the house of Max Butchers. It's really a big song about Stara Gradiška and Jasenovac as that this is a place, good place for us. What was before that? It was now we can see Srbena Vrbe again, Torcida, and Barry asked me, do they learn that in the schools? No, they don't learn anything in schools about Jasenovac and the Second World War as that. But they learn at TV with the President Kolinda, with Plenković, with songs of Thompson. When they go to Torcida, that's a football playing team, they play the songs about the greatness of the Croatian wars, Second World War and now. But when all this happened, a lot of people went out, lots of Croats. Even the pictures that about Jasenovac, that 762, a guy from Croatia find out, and one journal in Croatia, really important one, just put it there. So there is a lot of people like Dijana Budisavljević. So I agree, we should help the people like Diana and not forget either more than Mr. Pavelić there that is telling a story. And now I found really nice that Haile Selassie thing. Throughout history, it's been an inaction of those who could have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered the most. That has made it possible for evil to triumph. I hope that we all will give a little truth and a little ethics and philosophy or peace and not war, so this all Jasenovac, Jadovno, Stara Gradiška, Pag will never ever be again the topic of our stars. Thank you.
What Mina's point about the issue about the numbers is very important. That is a diversion by fascists to attack us on the issue of numbers and say we don't have exact numbers. But by the way, 98% of the Romas of Croatia were killed. In Croatia and Bosnia, 98%. So it was more extreme. I may have been thinking about the Jewish number, 80%. 80% was the percentage of Jews who were killed in Yugoslavia. 60,000 out of 83,000 were killed. That's about 80%. And the number of Romas was 98% of the total Roma population. So the Romas were completely exterminated in Croatia and Bosnia. We don't know the exact numbers of Serbs who were killed. We just know it's in the hundreds of thousands. How do we know that? We know it because of German record keeping, which the Germans kept very accurately for their, in their own death camps. But they also kept very good records, or reports anyway, of numbers of Serbs killed in Jasenovac and other camps throughout Croatia and Bosnia. And the problem is that nobody wants, or if people are denying that these historical records are significant. These historical records of German commanders and German diplomats in Yugoslavia are accurate. There's no question about it. That's what historians do. They study documents. They study historical documents. And we also, of course, have the records of survivors who testified as to what happened in Jasenovac, Jadovno, and other places. All right, well, I would like at this time to introduce my next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Stefan Karganovic, who from the Srebrenica Historical Project, who has for a long time been involved in the work, the very difficult work, which nobody wants to do because it is like putting your head in an oven, really. The work of trying to tell the truth about Srebrenica. This is if you think that trying to confront the truth about Jasenovac is hard, you haven't seen anything until you try to confront the big lies, the disinformation, and the false narrative about what happened in Srebrenica. Mr. Karganovic has for many years served on defense teams at the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia at The Hague, and he has been at the very forefront. And he has a new film, a documentary film, which is not quite out yet, but unfortunately we forgot to upload it today. We were going to show about 15 minutes or 20 minutes of it.
Blame me, I forgot to do it.
Okay, well, I'll share the blame with you. I didn't, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But it will be, it's a very good documentary, and we must think strategically about how to confront these lies, this disinformation, these false narratives. Because these false narratives, you don't create them unless you want to hurt somebody, unless you demonize people to destroy them. You create these false narratives to advance an agenda to undermine and destroy people. And so we have no choice but to fight these demonizations. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Stefan Karganovic, Srebrenica Historical Project. Stefan, yes, please.
It's a great honor to be here, of course, but after hearing this introduction about the oven, I'm thinking of giving up. I don't want to keep my head in the oven any longer. Anyway, my topic today is Jasenovac and Srebrenica, the real difference between a phony and a real genocide. It sounds like a high school assignment, compare and contrast. That's basically what I'm going to do. If you have any questions, I think we'll have a Q&A later. I brought some notes because with all the genocide denial legislation being planned, I want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing and get in trouble. You know, when you speak extemporaneously, you can say all sorts of things. So, our investigation of Srebrenica, I'm talking about my organization, Srebrenica Historical Project, points to some very important insights concerning Jasenovac. While the massacre in Srebrenica, arising from the conflict which took place in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, as you know, was engineered primarily to serve political purposes, it also had another extremely important consequence. And for me, that is the link, the basic link between Srebrenica and Jasenovac. That was to shift attention away from the genocide in Jasenovac suffered by the Serbian, Jewish, and Roma people who were trapped during World War II in the independent state of Croatia. One of the chief impacts of Srebrenica was to diminish the magnitude and horror of Jasenovac by imputing to the Serbs an invented crime of genocidal proportions allegedly committed by them during the Bosnian War. Now, if you're looking for a mirror image Jasenovac analog for the iniquitous use of Srebrenica that I just mentioned, I'll be happy to share it with you. I'm convinced that Jasenovac and more broadly the heinous atrocities committed by the Croatian Ustaše during World War II were a key factor during World War II in London's otherwise inexplicable switch from supporting their ally, General Mihailovic, to installing the internationalist agent Josip Broz Tito, a person of obscure origin and equally obscure allegiances, as the post-war ruler of Yugoslavia. If you think about it, it doesn't make sense. But I would say this: the British and the Western alliance as a whole critically needed the mass influence of the Roman Catholic Church for post-war mass mobilization against the left. They were seeing the Cold War coming, and the perceived threat of the victorious and strengthened Soviet Union in particular. A Roman Catholic Church untainted by association with fascism and genocidal atrocities committed by its followers in the heart of Europe was a sine qua non for that operation to be successful. Mihailovic's victory would have led to exposure of the nefarious link and instant discreditation of the Vatican on a scale that would dwarf the current scandals and render it useless as a moral authority in the forthcoming crusade against communism. The patriot Mihailovic therefore had to be jettisoned and ideological chameleon Tito raised in his place. It could safely be assumed that under Tito's rule, Jasenovac would be swept under the rug, which is exactly what happened. And we are bringing it from under the rug out now. Srebrenica has been aggressively promoted as a meme suggesting Serb guilt for the commission of genocide, although the factual circumstances of the event, which our NGO has thoroughly researched and established, unequivocally refuted. On the other hand, while Jasenovac satisfies convention of genocide criteria for the finding of genocide, that event is being systematically underplayed in such a manner that knowledge about it is suppressed and respect for hundreds of thousands of its victims is scant. I shall offer a brief comparative analysis, just like in a high school essay, of these two events in order to demonstrate how a misleading narrative about a politically contrived genocide has obscured a genuine genocide and largely impeded proper respect for its victims. Srebrenica fully fits in with a contemporary pattern of false flag operations, where the actor who actually commits the crime skillfully shifts the responsibility onto a designated fall guy, The latter's role is to be saddled with the blame. He is subjected to a brutal campaign of vilification and ultimately takes the assigned political and moral punishment. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? To this day, we do not have an official and reliable Srebrenica death toll. As Judge Jean-Claude Antonetti pointed out in his dissenting opinion in the Tolimer case, after more than 20 years of investigating, the Hague Tribunal has no clue of who conceived and ordered the crime. Srebrenica is plagued with uncertainties and deliberate obfuscations. The only items in the dubious Srebrenica narrative alleged to be unquestionable certainties are the two memes of genocide and 8,000 executed men and boys. A powerful special interest propaganda machine has skillfully and perfidiously injected them into the mass subconscious. That mechanism is driven by three fundamental political objectives. That agenda is behind the staging of Srebrenica killings and then utilizing their propaganda effects for base purposes. The first objective was to create a significant enough, inflatable and statistically elastic mass slaughter incident seemingly attributable to the Serbs in July of 1995. That was on the eve of Operation Storm, set to be executed in the Krajina in August of 1995, using NATO logistics and Croatian ground forces. As Peter Galbraith, the US ambassador to Zagreb at the time, freely admitted in 2012, quote, "Without Srebrenica, there would have been no Operation Storm." That strongly suggests that the former was conceived and carried out to provide cover for the latter. Another important secondary role of Srebrenica has been to serve as a symbolic construct, a nation-building identity tool for cementing Bosnian Muslim ethnicity. The third and perhaps most momentous of the uses of Srebrenica, as Diana Johnstone would put it, is to serve as the underpinning for the lethal right to protect interventionist doctrine. It was constructed supposedly to ensure that there would be no more Srebrenicas. However, in practice, this predatory doctrine has led to the pitiless destruction of several defenseless countries and the violent loss so far of at least 2 million innocent, mostly Muslim lives. R2P was designed to ensure hegemonic global control, not to prevent Srebrenica-style slaughter. I want to present a quick overview of Srebrenica before I return to Jasenovac. The Srebrenica narrative is fraught with glaring anomalies, which have gone largely unaddressed and unexamined critically. 1. On July 11, 1995, Srebrenica passed under the control of the Army of the Republic of Srpska. The Dutch battalion was also there, but it did nothing, acting mainly in an observer capacity. 2. After gaining control of Srebrenica, the Serbian army evacuated to Muslim-held territory about 20,000 Muslims from Srebrenica, women, children, and the elderly, who had gathered at the UN base in Potocari. The International Red Cross was present. 3. Simultaneously, men of military age, soldiers of the 28th Division of the Bosnian Muslim Army, numbering between 12 and 15,000, well armed and in a combative mood until literally the day before, suddenly and inexplicably lost their will to fight. Instead of putting up an active defense in a situation where they had a 3-to-1 numerical advantage over the Serb attackers, and where the rugged configuration of the landscape clearly favored them, they conducted a risky breakout maneuver out of Srebrenica towards Muslim lines in Tuzla. The 60-kilometer-long corridor they had to traverse through Serb territory had been prior to that heavily mined, and the retreating column also encountered numerous ambushes set up by the Serbian forces. The 28th Division suffered its most massive casualties as a result of combat with the Zvornik Brigade of the Bosnian Serb army, leaving between 4,000 and 5,000 dead. However, the 28th Division column was a legitimate military target, as admitted by the prosecution of the Hague Tribunal, and therefore no one was ever charged or convicted by the tribunal for causing it casualties. In the end, part of the retreating column were killed in combat, part reached Muslim lines in Tuzla, and part surrendered. It is important to point out that the remains of the majority of the putative genocide victims were found in the proximity of sites where there had been clashes between the Muslim column and the Serbian forces. 4. Of those who were taken prisoner, some were transferred to prisoner of war camps, and some, apparently the majority, unfortunately, were executed. A prominent role in the execution was played by the mysterious 10th Sabotage Detachment, an oddly multicultural unit within the Bosnian Serbian army, in the midst of an ethnic conflict, set up in 1994 for no apparent purpose and with no fixed position within the Serbian army's order of battle. The detachment's only significant operation turned out to be precisely the execution of Srebrenica prisoners in July of 1995. The famous Crown witness, Dražen Erdemović, that most of you have probably heard of, a condottiere of Croat ethnicity who fought in all three armies during the Bosnian conflict, and who ultimately became the Hague Tribunal's sole witness to the executions after making a convenient plea bargain with the prosecution, was a member of that unit. What makes Erdemović exceptional is that he is simultaneously the tribunal's only witness and also an avowed perpetrator of genocide. He is also the beneficiary of an extraordinarily mild 3-year prison term for such a grave crime. As debunked in detail by Bulgarian analyst Germinal Chivikov, Erdemović testified contradictorily and unconvincingly that during a 5-hour period, he and 7 other detachment colleagues executed 1,200 prisoners, bussed in, he could not state even the approximate number of the buses, to a field near a place called Branjevo. According to him, they shot the prisoners in groups of 10, which makes 120 groups, and given his time frame, leaves an improbable 2.5 minutes per group. During that time, the prisoners were walked a distance of 100 to 200 meters from the vehicles to the field of execution. They were searched and their personal documents and valuables were removed. The executions were carried out, and finally, the victims were checked for any survivors who were administered the coup de grace before bringing in the next group. All that in 2.5 minutes. According to Chivikov, this is a highly unlikely scenario, but the Hague Tribunal had no problems with it. And this scenario is incorporated lock, stock, and barrel in all of its Srebrenica judgments. An oddity of this story is that tribunal forensic experts who in 1996 searched the site indicated by Erdemović, instead of 1,200, found the remains of 127 victims, of whom 70 had ligatures, suggesting execution, and 90% reduction of Erdemović's claimed total. Another oddity, if you wish to view it as such, is the fact that the Hague Tribunal never sought nor indicted, much less questioned, Erdemović's colleagues in the commission of the crime, Franz Kos, Stanko Kojic, Vlastimir Golian, to name some, whom Erdemović had identified at his first appearance in The Hague in 1996, and whose whereabouts was not a secret. Erdemović was never asked who issued the execution order. At present, he is living as a protected witness of the Hague Tribunal in an unidentified country. We suspect it's Norway, but officially unidentified, and with a changed identity. 5. Thus, and this is another remarkable oddity of Srebrenica, that the public are mostly unaware of, during a quarter of a century since the first Srebrenica indictment, the tribunal has managed to condemn to an insignificant sentence only one perpetrator of the alleged genocide, Dražen Erdemović. Every other Srebrenica defendant found guilty and sentenced was not sentenced for directly executing prisoners, but based on concepts of command responsibility or joint criminal enterprise. The question of who ordered the physical liquidation of the prisoners remains glaringly unanswered to the present day. 6. Equally significant, most Hague Tribunal verdicts point to different figures ranging from 4,970 to about 8,000 as the alleged number of genocide victims. Key facts are systematically brushed aside, such as that all those figures necessarily include combat casualties from the retreating 28th Division column, as mentioned previously, as well as individuals who died or were killed in other ways in the Srebrenica enclave over the preceding 3-year period. Thus, neither the tribunal nor any other authority has to this day established even the approximate number of actual genocide victims. 7. The forensic picture of Srebrenica raises additional skepticism about the official Srebrenica narrative. We have analyzed every single one of the 3,568 autopsy reports and established that they contain the remains of 1,923 individuals based on the most reliable indicator, the number of paired femur bones. Based on the prosecution's own autopsy reports, of that number, 650 were killed by shrapnel, mines, and grenades, which excludes the possibility of execution, but is unquestionably consistent with combat. But the main point is that the total of 1,923 exhumed bodies represents all the human losses in the Srebrenica enclave during the entire conflict from 1992 to 1995. 8. When talking about Srebrenica, it is important to reiterate that without the genocide allegedly committed there and the hypocritically asserted obligation to prevent another Srebrenica, there would be no right to protect humanitarian intervention doctrine. That doctrine is increasingly becoming the principal raison d'etre of NATO and its excuse for the destruction of sovereign governments in different parts of the world under the guise of benevolence. Yet, and this is another Srebrenica oddity for you to chew on, at the Dayton Peace Conference in November of 1995, 4 months after the event, not a word was spoken about Srebrenica genocide or even the mass execution of prisoners under any name. Does anyone seriously think that Alija Izetbegović would have refrained from extracting maximum political advantage in the negotiating process by using the Srebrenica card if he had any solid evidence of genocide to show? There is, in fact, much evidence to suggest that Srebrenica was initially a false flag improvised to provide media and political cover for the huge crimes committed by Croats and their NATO backers against the Serbian population of Krajina in Operation Storm, which followed shortly thereafter. Srebrenica's potential as a tool to be used for other purposes was grasped only gradually and later. The genocide refrain was introduced only in 1997 at an international conference in Sarajevo, including the 8,000 men and boys meme. The right to protect use of Srebrenica came several years after that, around the time of the Kosovo War. So much for an essential overview of Srebrenica. We now return to Jasenovac. There is an immense contrast between Srebrenica and Jasenovac. Jasenovac was not a false flag operation, but an openly conducted, ideologically inspired extermination site, which functioned publicly and in accordance with the laws and political goals of the satellite pro-Nazi Croatian wartime state. All the resources of the Croat state were consciously mobilized and intensely focused to make Jasenovac possible as the country's premier mass killing field and slaughterhouse. That is not to neglect, of course, thousands of Serbian villages and other less well-known spots where the relentless extermination program, which shall forever blacken the name of that unhappy land, was being implemented. I concluded with a question about Jasenovac, to which so far no one has been able to give me a coherent answer. But I think it is an important question. I will raise it here. For the last 20 or so years, vast treasure has been channeled into Srebrenica mass grave exhumations to forensically document inflated prisoner of war execution figures. As I have pointed out, best efforts and unhindered access notwithstanding, Srebrenica exhumations have been an embarrassing flop. Just slightly over 1,000 human remains have been uncovered in a condition or with a pattern of injury suggesting execution far short of the target figure of 8,000. For Jasenovac, we have a multitude of independent reports, many from shocked but victim-hostile, perpetrator-friendly German sources, Italian as well, but the Italians were much more humane during the last war than the Germans, and they were more deeply shocked on a human level. The Germans were shocked on the German level, whatever that means, but they were still shocked about the massiveness and depravity of crimes that were committed there. They run not into thousands, but into hundreds of thousands. So here is my question. For 3 years during the conflict in the 90s, the site of the main Jasenovac camp on Croatian territory was under the control of Serbian forces. During that time, not the slightest effort was made by local Serbs or their authorities to exhume any of the Jasenovac killing sites and to forensically document what was bulldozed over and hidden underneath the Earth's surface. Why? Assuming that the exigencies of war might have prevented them from taking these reasonable steps at the time, I have a follow-up question. The war has been over for a quarter of a century, but the Jasenovac death camp extended over to the other bank of the Sava River, which is now fully under the control of the Republic of Srpska. And here I am indebted to Mr. Daniel Simic for correcting me. I thought that was called Stara Gradiška, but he assures me that it is called Gradina. I accept that. So the Gradina camp of the Jasenovac complex is beyond the reach of Croatian authorities, and they cannot tamper with or misrepresent the evidence that lies just under the surface of the earth. That is all the more important since historians and survivors are unanimous that most of the mass killings associated with Jasenovac actually occurred on the Gradina side of the Sava River, across the river in what is now the Republic of Srpska. I hope that the authorities of the Republic of Srpska are listening to my remarks. For 2 decades, they have tolerated tendentious exhumations around Srebrenica on their territory, designed to document a phony genocide and saddle them and their people with responsibility for it. Every year, with great fanfare, Republic of Srpska officials come to Gradina to collect political points by commemorating the horrors of Jasenovac, but they do it risk-free, while remaining on the Earth's surface. When will they send a team of forensic experts with shovels to start digging to check and document what lies underneath the surface? I know that in today's brutal neo-fascist world, expecting risky behavior from politicians is unrealistic. But it is my moral obligation to pop the question: why hasn't the government of the Republic of Srpska done the natural thing to document the scope of the real genocide that not too long ago was inflicted on its own people and took place on its territory? Why has it failed to do even the minimum to collect the tangible evidence fully within its reach, to settle once and for all the demeaning and cynical Croatian numbers game about the victims of Jasenovac? I'm ready to take my shovel and to start digging. May I count on all of you to come along with your shovels to join me? I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. There's a lot to discuss and a lot of questions I'm sure that will be raised, but I think we should proceed with the remaining presentations before we move to a question and answer. Our next speaker is Dr. Liliana Petrovic. Please welcome Dr. Liliana Petrovic.
So the title of my paper is Where We Have Failed, I say, the role of Serbs in the perpetuation of the war crimes myth. I will be speaking mostly about Serbs. And a lot of the things that I'll talk about you've heard already mentioned in passing. So first of all, I'd like to say I'm very honored to be here tonight amongst these distinguished guests, to be named among them as a speaker. They categorically outrank me both in terms of knowledge and experience in this subject matter. Last year, I spoke about international law and aggression, a subject with which I have some familiarity. This year, I approached the subject of commemorating Jasenovac a bit differently. I approached this conference with a series of observations and consequently a series of questions. I don't come to you as an expert, so please don't take me as such. Every year, we gather to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust in former Yugoslavia, to recount and remember their acts of bravery, to tell these stories in the context of witness testimony, as well as the context of an historical and legal understanding. We make connections with past and current events in order to understand within a greater narrative not only what happened then, but what is happening today. So I approach this subject cautiously and humbly, not as somebody who is an expert on Holocaust scholarship in former Yugoslavia, but rather as somebody who isn't an expert. And I bet Barry's thinking, this is not why I called you. You're supposed to know something about this. In fact, I don't just want to declare my own ignorance of the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. I want to make it a theme of this presentation and make the case that I'm not unique in this. In so doing, I want to begin a discussion about where we are today as Serbs in our historical understanding of Holocaust scholarship in former Yugoslavia. For a while now, I don't know how many years, I've been coming to this particular event, this commemoration of Jasenovac here in New York City. I'm coming from Montreal. For the first time this year, I asked myself why this event was unique to New York, in the sense that there is no such event in Montreal or Toronto or Ottawa, the cities within my 500-kilometer radius. I only learned about Jasenovac as an adult, and even that accidentally. I had come across gruesome images of Jasenovac put to a song by the popular Croatian singer, whom you've heard mentioned more than once tonight, goes by the name of Thompson. I looked up everything there was to know about Jasenovac, and somewhere in that research, I found out about JRI, and I found Barry's name. I don't know if you know this story, Barry. I contacted Barry, email, phone, I think both, and I learned about this organization and I learned about this event. Barry was quite familiar with Thompson and these videos, and he even told me that efforts had been made to ban Thompson's appearances in New York. I hear now tonight that he no longer has travel restrictions in that area. I know that he also sang in Toronto, so he's lifted, those travel restrictions have been lifted from him. So it became normal to me that JRI is a single institution that I know of that holds these events once a year, here. However, I started to look at the greater picture of Jasenovac's education as a general subject. It would appear as if the education of Jasenovac so this is what I want to say that I think is sensitive, is not a priority within our own Serbian communities, in the sense that I don't see events and discussions and presentations and lectures planned around this subject, let's say throughout the Serbian community, or at least where I live and where I've lived in Canada, which includes Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa. I'm not sure about the education of Jasenovac in Serbia and Republika Srpska, but I'd hope that's going to be a theme tonight that we're going to discuss to find out what's happening in that regard. I'd like to address, and again with some caution, because I want to be corrected if I'm wrong about any of this, the role of the Serbian community to promote education within our own institutions. So I'm not talking about Croatians teaching Croatians about Jasenovac. I'm talking about Serbians teaching Serbians about Jasenovac. So whether that be it in our church or our schools, what I have found, however, in my research, is a powerful trend towards what I will call the perpetuation of the war crimes myth in our current discourse. Okay, that is to say, there are more than a few Serbian internationally recognized, I'm putting this in quotes, human rights activists, supported by non-governmental organizations whose sole purpose it seems to be to perpetuate the war crimes narrative. That is to say, that Serbs have been the primary and sole aggressors in the breakup of Yugoslavia, that Serbs have been responsible for genocide from Bosnia to Kosovo, and that Serbs are entirely blameworthy for this extreme nationalism and any number of war crimes whose cases have been heard by the ICTY in The Hague. To my mind, there is a connection between the failure to understand and educate our greater community regarding the history of the actual genocide of Serbs, Jews, and Roma in former Yugoslavia, with the way in which we as a people are so easily manipulated by the Western mainstream narrative today. And furthermore, I fear that as a result of the perpetuation of this narrative, we as a people, our history, our reality, our stories will be erased. We are in the process of erasing our own identity, which includes our history, our testimony, our reality. I want to focus on 3 examples of erasure of Serbian history and the denial of Serbian reality today. To show what I mean, I will look at three different stories. I will look at the Michael Walzer affair, the monument of Acif Hadžihemtović, and the phenomenon of award-winning Serbian activists for human rights like Nataša Kandić and company. Those are my 3 examples. So the Michael Walzer affair. Does anyone know who Michael Walzer is? You know Michael? So Michael Walzer is a prominent American political theorist and public intellectual. He popularized the idea of humanitarian military intervention. He was a strong advocate for the US-led NATO aggression in Yugoslavia. He also advocated for the military invasion using land troops in Serbia. So no one was more surprised than Michael Walzer himself when he was awarded an honorary doctorate degree from Belgrade University. The ceremony took place not far from the remains. So the ceremony took place not far from the remains of the buildings destroyed by NATO in the center of the city. I can't help wondering what he himself was thinking as he was decorated with this honor, in full view of the result of the destructive force he so advocated of the hegemonic state from which he hails. More importantly, though, I can't imagine what the intellectual elites who came up with this idea to decorate and honor in this way a person who advocated for aggression against their own country were thinking. Furthermore, despite near universal realization among the Serbian academy community not due in least to the efforts of a few intellectuals leading that campaign, including Aleksandar Jokic and Milan Brdar, that a mistake of grave proportion had occurred. The honorary doctorate degree was never rescinded. You will not, however, find listed among Professor Walzer's degrees and awards on this list of achievement anywhere. He did not list that he is an honorary degree recipient of the University of Belgrade. It seems it was more important for us to recognize him than it ever was for him to recognize us. This incident all began with the news publicized by the media that a conference held by ILEX, that is the International Law and Ethics Series, would take place on the topic called Asymmetric Wars, International Relations, and Just War Theory at the University of Belgrade from June 17th to 19th. That 14 presenters were to participate with only a single scholar from their own faculty, and that out of all of those presenters, 3 had advocated the bombing of Serbia. It was made public by the media about a week prior to the event that indeed Michael Walzer had been selected as the key guest, and he would be the recipient of the honorary doctorate degree. Now, I think if we look at the justification of the university's response for why Michael Walzer had been chosen, we can develop some insight into why such an action would be taken. Now, here I quote, "We believe that recognizing Michael Walzer by giving him the honorary doctorate would contribute to the affirmation of the university in the world and would be incentive for international cooperation." And therein, I think, lie the crux of the problem. Because of this desperate need to cooperate with the international community, and what this means precisely is not only not clear, but a bit worrisome as well. We risk denying our own reality, the reality that we are honoring a person who advocated for the military invasion of its own country. Now, the second example I want to examine is the monument of Atsiv Hadžimetović. Thank you. 1887-1941. He was an Albanian politician in the Sanjak region of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in the interwar period and during World War II. In the interwar period, he was a mayor of Novi Pazar and a deputy of Džemijet following the 1923 elections. After the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia, he was appointed mayor of Novi Pazar under the German military government, territory of the military commander in Serbia, in quotes. Throughout and up until the end of the war period, he occupied numerous prominent political positions. In the end, he was executed by the Yugoslav partisans for his collaboration with the Axis for massive war crimes against Serbs and killings of Albanians who were against his rule, purportedly. Aside from his explicit aspirations towards creating a greater Albania, his efforts, for example, to Albanize the Bosniak population of Novi Pazar, banning, for example, the traditional Muslim hat, the fez, I want to specifically focus on his war crimes collaboration with the Axis forces. He was found guilty of executing nearly 7,000 Serbs. He sent communists to concentration camps, and he played a significant role in the elimination of Serbian, Jewish, and Roma populations of Novi Pazar. For his collaboration, he was awarded the Iron Cross by Nazi Germany. Okay. In 2012, a memorial was erected in Novi Pazar honoring Hadžimetović. Furthermore, an initiative has been put forth to name the stadium of Novi Pazar after him. And currently, there has been a proposal to put forth to change over 700 street names to honor not only war criminals who served under the Third Reich, but also war crimes from our own recent history. And I can only understand this as an action, again, an attempt to look conciliatory to the international community at the expense of our own history. Now, this is currently an issue of public debate, and what will happen I'm not clear about. But it is on the table and it is being discussed. A Nazi collaborator having a stadium named after him, a monument erected for him in Novi Pazar. These things are happening right now in Serbia. The third example I want to examine is what I would like to call the Nataša Kandić human rights activist phenomenon. Like, there's a title there, because there are a lot of people under Nataša Kandić who do the same kind of work. She just is the most famous. You all know who Nataša Kandić is, right? Okay. So I thought that you might. So just to tell you what is said about her, Nataša Kandić is a Serbian, I'm putting in quotes, human rights activist. The reason I put the quotes around human rights is because she seems to be very selective about whose human rights she is most concerned about. She's a founder of an organization called Humanitarian Law Center. Although she doesn't actually have a law degree or anything like that. That's what her organization is called. This organization is purported to campaign for human rights and reconciliation in former Yugoslavia, and it focuses on the Serbian role of the conflict. Its research focuses on the documentation of Serbian war crimes, from which the ICTY would rely heavily for their prosecutions of Serbian military forces. In fact, it was evidence from this organization which provided the, quote, smoking gun for the accusation of the Srebrenica massacres. Kandić is the recipient of over 20 international, regional, and national human rights awards. Among her numerous awards by the likes of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the National Endowment for Democracy, and many, many more, she was named Honorary Citizen of Sarajevo, and the magazine Slobodna Bosna named her Person of the Year in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Furthermore, she was honored by the President of Croatia for her, quote, for her significant contribution to the advancement of human morals. That's an award. And finally, she was awarded for her work on the Golden Map of Kosovo by the President and former KLA leader at that time, Ramush Haradinaj. I'm sorry I didn't pronounce that correctly. The job of Nataša Kandić, a sociologist by training, is listed as a human rights activist. But specifically, that means that she researches and documents Serbian war crimes. The funding for her organization comes primarily from the George Soros Open Society Institute. There is no doubt that being a selective human rights activist can be a lucrative business. Indeed, in my research, I came upon so many names of activists, journalists, and artists alike of Serbian nationality, whose uniform criticism of Serbia seems to be, in my mind, not so much a coincidence, but a factor determining their success. If Nataša Kandić, for example, made Holocaust education in Yugoslavia during the Second World War her work, little doubt she would not be as internationally recognized and well-funded as she is now. If her work centered around the critical evaluation of key events surrounding the Srebrenica massacre, as is Stefan Karaganovic's work, there is no doubt her fame and recognition would not be as extensive. I mean, how many awards have you received for your work? And did George Soros offer you money for it?
No, that's why I'm broke.
You should apply. You should apply.
I was thinking of that.
So, as you've heard earlier, in fact, there is a petition in Canada put forth by NDP Member of Parliament Brian Mass to criminalize any discussion that Srebrenica was not a genocide. Not only would you be not getting funding for your work, you might be arrested in Canada.
I look forward to it, as I told you.
But I didn't know that. So my point is that Holocaust education is not as central in the education of our youth as it should be. Perhaps as a testimony we can look around the room and count the number of Serbian youth. I am part of the Serbian diaspora. I was born and raised in Canada. I went to church every Sunday. I participated in cultural church activities, sang in the church choir, still do, went to Sunday school. I learned about Jasenovac from a video when I was doing research for my doctoral dissertation on the decriminalization of aggression in international law. And I'm not alone in that. If it was just me, I would just be, an idiot. But it's not just me. Jasenovac's education is not central and primary to the minds of Serbian youth, I think. I'm not even sure there's an appetite for it, and that's what I'm worried most about. It's associated with that which is old, history, ancient history, and there's a desire to move forward, to be associated with that which is new and contemporary. To be anti-Serb is certainly more popular than to defend the history and the reality of Serbians today. There's enormous pressure to deny historical and contemporary facts because it makes us uncomfortable to do so. It makes us look blindly nationalistic and chauvinistic, and through that fear of appearing decidedly unmodern, we are in the process of erasing ourselves. Serbia tries so hard to be conciliatory in the international community, to be taken seriously, to be allowed to sit at the table. We will concede to things that we should never even consider. We will apologize for Srebrenica, as we have in Belgrade, or we'll allow street names to be changed to war criminals, not to appear too patriotic. We will give an honorary degree to a person who advocates for ground invasion of our own country. We're like Novak Djokovic on a grand scale. I'm sorry, I know it's a sore spot today. But like Novak Djokovic, he tries so hard for everyone to like him. And no matter what he does, people won't give him the time of day. It really is. My observations and conclusions that are in an effort to want to belong to the bigger international community, we are not only denying our own reality, we're rewriting it. However, I don't want to end with that. I think there is optimism as well. There are conferences like this one. Efforts are being made through film, through writing, and testifying to our collective history. We must strengthen our resolve to make Holocaust education central to the reality of our youth today. And through our institutions, culture and art, through books and film and literature, it is possible. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Daniel Simic. Before I call him up, I should point out that we unveiled a monument today in the Holocaust Memorial Park in Brooklyn at 1 o'clock. It is the second monument that we have unveiled to the Holocaust in Yugoslavia. It was a monument to Jadovno, and of course we must give credit also for having done this to the Jadovno 1941 or Jadovno.org organization led by Dusan Bastasic, and which Daniel Simic represents here today. This camp was the precursor to Jasenovac, but also it was a camp where Serbs and Jews were brought along with other political opponents from May to July, August 1941. They were brought to Gospic, and then they were murdered at Jadovno, and of course Pag was an adjoining camp on the island of Pag. All of that is a very important part of the Holocaust, and also it was an important thing to bring this monument to New York City, to the Holocaust Park, which, in case you don't know, is the only outdoor museum dedicated to commemorating the Holocaust in the United States. It's an outdoor museum. It was formally established in 1985 by Mayor Ed Koch, and then opened in 1997 with Simon Wiesenthal present. And it is the only museum of its kind in the world, actually, where all of the camps in the Holocaust are mentioned, where the role of the fascists is explained. It's really a remarkable place. but it did not have any mention of anything in Yugoslavia, except on the main monument it did mention Yugoslavia. And then we brought the Jasenovac monument in 2005, and then now today, for the first time, a monument for Jadovno. This was an important day where we made an important step forward. I think it's something, at the park today I made the reference to Voltaire, who said a long time ago in his novel Candide that we must cultivate our own gardens, meaning we must work locally but think globally. We must work hard locally and also connect with our colleagues, with our allies, with our brothers and sisters in other organizations in other parts of the world. And with that, I introduce our brother Daniel Simic.
I'm here to greet you in front of Jadovno 1941 organization from Banja Luka, Republic of Srpska. Most of you know that Republic of Srpska is a Serbian part of Bosnia, and we have our separate state there. Until 2005, we used to have our separate army, but now that's not the case. I recently today spoke about Jadovno concentration camp, but our thesis here is a little bit different, so I had a short notice to adapt, and I think I'll manage. Because the thesis about false narratives as excuse to genocide and excuse to military aggression to other nation or to derogatory behavior to other groups and non-wanted groups, it's something which I'm victim also from my childhood. I would say one excerpt from my speech today, and that's the sad truth. Until 2010, when we organized the first Remembrance Day of Jadovno, nobody spoke about this particular death camp. Nobody knew what that was at all. It was completely forgotten. To be honest, even I possessed no real knowledge what happened from May to August 1941 in our area of Jadovno, Gospić and Pag. I had just vague picture about Jadovno, wrongly derived from lectures in elementary school. Not on history class, but one of the language and literature. Until I met president of Jadovno 1941, Dušan Bastašić, and that was in 2010, and I was born in 1977. So only when I met him, I realized that Jadovno, it's not what I thought. I thought that Jadovno was an incident, massacre committed by Croatian Ustašas in some village, and at that point, even Goran Kovačić heard about it. He was shocked, and then inspired to write the poem Jama, which in Serbian means pit. Truth is much more horrific, and for a half a century very well hidden from public in former communist Yugoslavia. Death in Jadovno was no mere incident or war crime massacre. Death in Jadovno has a factory setting. In the triangle of Jadovno in Mountain Velebit, town of Gospić and its railroad station, and then aquatorium of island Pag in the Adriatic Sea, independent state of Croatia managed to, according to investigation of historian Đuro Zatezala, to kill 40,000 men, women, children, and elderly in just 132 days. And now I'm switching off to Jasenovac, because all of us here know that Jadovno was forefather to Jasenovac, because the last 2,000 prisoners that Italian fascists found in Jadovno concentration camps were first settlers of Jasenovac concentration camp, which is more factory or industrial situated on the banks of confluence of two rivers with the railroad and in a somehow central position to exterminate Serbian people. I also didn't know much about Jasenovac at all when I was a kid. My first trip to Jasenovac was when they took us to Josip Broz birth house in Kumrovec in present-day Slovenia. And after that, because Banja Luka is close to Jasenovac, is nearby, it's by the road, they took us to Jasenovac. But I went to the Jasenovac Museum, I think only in 2011 or 10. I will lie you, because it was always closed. When we were kids, we came to Jasenovac Museum in Jasenovac, and it was totally closed. And we never hear any things about, we knew about yellow bands around for Jews, but we didn't know that it was white or blue ribbons if you are Orthodox, and it was insignia like Orthodox. And Pravoslavac on Serbian language by Latinic alphabet. So museum was always closed, and I was visiting that museum in 2008. And it was funny that I wrote in some article that's probably the only place so well known in present day Croatia where you can sing out loud the Serbian patriotic songs. Not because of special status of Jasenovac, as Auschwitz has special status in Jewish people. So if you are Jewish, you have special treatment in Auschwitz. But because there is no one there. Jasenovac Memorial, it's totally deserted, and museum, of course, is closed and renovating. Yeah? And I wrote some article about that. You know, you can sing Serbian patriotic songs in Jasenovac out loud, and no one will beat you or arrest you or anything. And Željko Cvijanović, now late Željko Cvijanović, in newspaper European, that didn't want to publish that. It was too Serbian, it was too nationalistic, it was just merely information. But it was too scary to publish that in 2009. And distinguished predecessor of mine on this stage, Ljiljana Petrović, had a great point. I think now, if we're talking about Jasenovac, I think we have like a large Serbian problem, which is made by Serbs. Serbians don't learn their children about Jasenovac, about Jadovno, about any of that, as I can witness myself, because my parents didn't know well. My parents are born after the Second World War, and they are raised in the atmosphere of brotherhood and unity, and talk about Serbian ancestry was something that was forbidden, you know. And my grandfather had some expression when somebody is picking the nose, you know. He said, here Serbs goes into the cosmos." You know? That was some joke. But when he said Serb, that sounded for me like old Slavic, you know, like some old Slavic language, and there is some Serbian language. And I was always amazed, and I asked my older sister, how are we, like Yugoslavs? But we are speaking Serbo-Croatian language. What's that? What's Serbs, what's Croats? And that was my understanding about nation. Beside of the other thing, when you are going to your grandfather on the Christmas Eve, or when you're going to your grandmother for Slava, you know, I don't know how to translate Slava in English, but we all know what that is, this special Serbian. And I will now show you one special new thing. I was supposed to speak about our discovery of a mass grave on Island Pag, and we prepared some aerial pictures of that landscape and particular mass grave, but we didn't manage to download it now. But I found some pictures of 2 weeks before. We were in Belgrade. This is in Zemun, and you can notice that all streets in Belgrade now, and also 5 years ago in Banja Luka also. In Banja Luka they were only in Cyrillic alphabet, but now in Banja Luka and also in Belgrade, Belgrade was first, are now in Cyrillic and Latinic alphabet, which means that to Latinic alphabet. In Klaonička ulica there is a graveyard of Zemun. How can I switch to another? Can I go to another picture? Up, down, something? How to go with next one? You don't know? Like slideshow, maybe. Okay, what we will look the photos lately, but what's the point? I knew for the Kunstlager Zemlin, which was German Gestapo Kunstlager in Independence Day, independent state of Croatia, in present-day Serbia, on the soil of Sava River, on the other bank, in the Zemun and New Belgrade area. Yeah, but can I? Okay, I must do that. Okay, I'll do what I must. And for example, this is the monument. We took the icon of Saint Patron of organization Jadovno 1941, old Vukašin, the victim of Jasenovac. And the insignia here says, to victims of fascist terror, 1941-1944. This is factographically not correct, because Germans were Nazis, not fascists. But fascist is commonly used to describe that totalitarian regime during the Second World War in Yugoslavia. It's in Serbian narrative, everybody is a fascist. And we discovered about 16,000 people were killed in Staro Sajmište, how they call it today. But in those days it was Kunstlager Zemlin, yeah? Or Kunstlogor Zemun, because there was no new Sajmište. Sajmište means fair, yeah? Buildings for a fair. And on this particular site, which is on a Jewish graveyard in Zemun, it's a place where 6,500 of Serbs were killed and buried, children, women, and elderly, which are brought from the Kozarska Dubica, Medveđa, and some other villages on the slopes of Kozara mountain in present-day Republic of Srpska, or northwestern Bosnia. And I never ever heard about it. Most of people from Zemun who are near that graveyard never heard that story, knew nothing about it. And if you have such a historical remembrance or non-remembrance, it's easy to manipulate with people. It's easy to make some stories, and it's easy to implement some stupid stories as Srebrenica genocide or other narratives. So we managed to find that some horrific pictures. I will find you later. For example, oh Mac. So this is that monument. It's a plain monument, and it's said after that, Union of Fighters of National Liberation War Zemun. Nothing more. There is no who was killed there, why he was killed there, when this occurred, why this occurred, and it's commonplace on all Brotherhood and Unity monuments. And Ljiljana Petrović was talking about Serbian, I don't know, self-chauvinism, I will call that. And I think there is four major or three major terms why is that so. First thing, it's that communist ancestry, including the books, scholar system, and which is most important, people which are derived from that period, who doesn't see a problem, for example, in not teaching kids about Jasenovac, not teaching kids about Jadovno. They don't see a problem about that, and they even say, don't burden children with such horror stories, or etc., etc. But now in 1991, we saw that if we were smart and talking, our grandfathers and grandmothers are clearly, if they clearly explained us what happened in an independent state of Croatia, we will be better organized, we would have better timing, and we will be, I don't know, maybe possible to defend ourselves. more properly. So, for example, I will add some examples to your auto-chauvinism of Serbian people. There is a journalist called Denis Latin in Croatia, and he was very popular, and he has some show called Latinica. And before that, he was editor of one show we called it called in Serbian slikom na sliku, which means picture on picture, but we call it slinom na slinu, which means with slime on slime, which is in Serbian it's a funny, you know, it's a game of words. And he was like in that show that it's horrific, not chauvinistic, but racist. Claims about Serbs, etc., etc. And after the war, when he became a little more liberal for Croatian standards, a Society of Journalists in Belgrade decided to give him an award. And on their stupidity, he added one more. He refused the award. And he said he doesn't want to receive award from that particular society, because that society is regime society, you know? Because there is two major journalist societies in Belgrade. He favors that one of Nataša Kandić. And the second example I will give you, it's when mayor of, even the present day mayor of Zagreb, Milan Bandić, came to Banja Luka to some talks. You know, Banja Luka and Zagreb, we are neighbors, we will have cooperation, etc., etc. And there was like a pile of journalists, you know? So much and so uncommon for Bandić that Bandić said, even if I open 3 bridges or a railroad station in Zagreb, maybe then half of these journalists will come in Zagreb, you know? And funny thing, it was that he came a day after he signed a petition against Cyrillic alphabet on the public buildings in Vukovar, which is the town with Serbian majority or significant number in Croatia, one of the rare cities. And there is no journalist who asked him about it, you know? And that's the state we are in now. And what to say more, when I discovered you that radio television of Republic of Srpska, state television, state funded, it's using subtitles on 99% of foreign movies and TV series on Latinic alphabet. It's like a state policy, you know? And they do that, by my opinion and by my research, because they marketing guildas want them to. And they say if you wrote in Cyrillic alphabet, nobody in Federation or in Croatia will watch your show, and I will have less share on marketing, you know? And that's something as a motive that you can understand from I don't know, some entrepreneur who is in media business. But you cannot tolerate such a behavior from public television. And so, communist ancestry, Western pressure, aggression, and induced psychosis that we developed as a Serb. And there is a third factor, which Ljiljana mentioned, and that's something that I call NGOs. NGOs in Republic of Srpska now, or Serbia especially, it's something as a collaborationistic aristocracy. You know, those are people who never lifted anything harder than a mobile phone, and they are living very well. They are traveling all around the world. It was especially painful when you see them in, I don't know, 2003, and they are waving you from the New York or Brazil or somewhere in Paris, and you must bring the certificate that your grandfather didn't kill the Turk in the first Serbian uprising to get a visa, you know, if you have some other point of view. So Serbians are in present day are in state of I call that syndrome of cooked frog. You know, I don't know if you know what that means. Syndrome of a cooked frog, it's scientists discover if you put the frog in hot water and she can jump out from the glass, she will do it immediately. But if you put it and gradually warm up the water, frog will be cooked alive. She will never jump out. And that's something what's happening to us now. And I will make some examples of Croatian media war machinery, as I will call that now. For example, in Jutarnji List, one of the major newspapers in Croatia, there was an article about Božo Judaš. That isn't his real childbirth name, but he was Subotic. Nobody knows how his father and mother gave him name, and he was a child which was taken to the Jastrebarsko occupation camp. And in that Jastrebarsko camp for children, especially for children. And he has parasites in his stomach, and he was all swollen, and he had only one red dress, but like a real dress, like for a girl, and some Croatian driver who, with his wife, they didn't have children, and he took him to thinking that he's a girl. But he discovered in a cafe down the road that he was some waitress bring up the skirt and said, no, this is not a girl, you know. But he then decided to take him, so he's raised up and so on and so on. But it is a large article on 2.5 pages of daily newspapers, and one word Serb. There is no one word. There was that he's Božo from some village under the Kozara mountain. He was took to Jastrebarsko, then some other guy found him, and in all article, complete article, there is no one mention that he was a Serb. Like from some nation that you take children and the children become Croats. I don't know today. And it's like totally public. And after that, I will put your attention to another example which is more illustrative. In 2017, we were on Jadovno on Remembrance Day at Šaranova Jama in mountain of Velebit, and guests that year were Milorad Dodik, which was in those days president of Republic of Srpska, and Mladen Ivanić, which was Serbian part of a collective presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbian member of 3. There is also Croat and Muslim. And tomorrow, and that day, in Croatian media, there was no word. It's even impossible. I think we in Republic of Srpska, some Nataša Kandić fans will wrote something about something that we do not want to be in media. But that's unbelievable. There is no article. Like the president of the other state came here in a private visit. You know, he went to the Adriatic coast to put the legs in the natrium chloride. And that was totally unbelievable for me. But year after, I was in that bus. They tortured us as always on a border about 2 hours of checking of documents, coming out of the bus, checking every bag and so on. That's normal for Croatians. But after kilometer and a half, maybe 3, they stopped us again and took some people from the bus. One of them was Dane Lukajić, which was the colonel of Army of Republic of Srpska. And he is a security officer in the army, and he had some engagement in Manjača war prisoner camp. And they arrested him. To make story short, a month ago, they judged him on 6 years on the basis of someone's claim that he swing with a pistol and I don't know, hit him in the head. And that was his guilt. There is no proofs, and etc. But when they arrested Daniel Lukajic, and we came to the commemoration to continue Remembrance Day, there was a pile of journalists over journalists on Jadovno. Now, last year there was no one, and this year everything was ready to interconnect. They proclaimed him war criminal in newspapers immediately, and their opinion is to connect two things. Serbians are real war criminals. In Jadovno there was no crime, and on the top, on bottom of the pits are only garbage. You know, and that's a story. So I will interconnect my story to Stefan Karganovic's story and to say that, to my amazement, I don't know what Serbs are waiting with the proclamation of Jasenovac's genocide against the Serbs. They are almost Serbian authorities in Republika Srpska, which is more Serbian than Serbia, I must say. Sorry, but I must say that. Because we were in a war for 3.5 years, not some month and a half of bombardment by NATO or Kosovo, but it's in our bones to be Serbs and to be aware of danger if you are caught by other side which doesn't like you. But in Serbia they are not aware of the problem, so you can always read about some Serbian kids who were beaten in Zagreb or on seaside, or Serbian like Crvena Zvezda waterfly. You may be heard for that attempt of murder of Serbian waterfly players in Split. And to conclude all this, I'll appeal to all of you to hear my story, because our society, Jadovno, 1941, we came out with the initiative to name genocide against Serbs in the Second World War. It's not concluded. We proposed the word pokolj, which on Serbian means slaughter. And we were guided by the thought that in collective consciousness of Serbian people now, when you speak about Ustašas, they always say Ustaše su klale, which means Ustašas were slaughtering people. So that was our idea. And we found some unexpected opposition. And we now expect some public hearings, some conferences on which we need to find the most appropriate word, because Jews have Holocaust for international purposes. They have Shoah in Ivrit or in Hebrew language. Gypsies have, or Roma people have Poraimus. Samurdipen, I think the other term. Armenians call that atrocities by the Ottoman Empire great crime, etc., etc. Serbs need one word who will poetically and historically correct explain in one word to take one word for all the suffering. And I will appeal to you to bring us some help and good advices. And for the end, I will tell that on the June 15 this year we will again go and mark 10th anniversary of Jadovno concentration death camp in Mountain Velebit, and it's a shame. It's 3 years long story, and only 10 years we are remembering of it. I think that it's time to make a stop on such auto-chauvinistic behavior and to learn about our history before it's too late. Thank you.